For me, Heritage night. For myself, actually. Good morning and greetings. Welcome to the fourth annual Rosalyn Terborg-Penn Women's History Month Convocation. I'm Dr. Ida E. Jones, Associate Director of Special Collections and the University Archivist. On behalf of the Women's History Month Convocation Committee, I would like to thank Dr. Adele Newson-Horst and the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Program, members of Epsilon Sigma Chapter of Iota, Triota, National Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Honor Society, the Beulah M. Davis Special Collections Department, and Dr. Edwin T. Johnson, Convocation Committee Coordinator. I will be your mistress of ceremonies throughout the course of the day. I will now pass the mic to Miss Deja Knight, representing the Morgan State University Choir, where she will be singing Lift Every Voice and Sing. When she arrives, please stand and join with her in the Negro National Anthem.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise highest the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Is won.
Thank you, Ms. Knight. Thank you, Ms. Knight, for that lovely rendition. I am now going to bring to you the occasion of our gathering on today. So, find that page. In 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson created Negro History Week to share the accomplishments of African Americans with the world. He selected February to honor the birthdays of President Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, roughly between February 12th and February 14th. In 1976, under U.S. President Gerald Ford, Negro History Week was renamed African American History Month. President Ford stated that all Americans would benefit from acknowledging the accomplishments of African American citizens. It's important to note that Dr. Woodson's organization, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded in 1915, crusaded throughout the 20th century to ensure that every citizen would know the name and the work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson. In 2023, Woodson's Association continues to champion the researching, publishing, and promotion of African American history, life, and culture. Every year since 1928, the association selects a Black history theme to guide targeted discussions about African American history. The 2023 Black history theme is Black resistance. Morgan scholars contribute to the annual activities of the association, as did our legacy founder and namesake, the late Dr. Rosalyn Terborg-Penn. So if we fast forward Morgan State and Woodson, they found synergy in September of 1989 during the presidential administration of Dr. Earl S. Richardson. President Richardson instituted a year-long celebration of African American history and culture to be marked by monthly convocations at which the Morgan community reminds itself of the achievements of its past and the imperative for every greater triumph in its future and the honor to which we contribute to humanity. The year-long celebrations stem from September to April, consisting of 9 convocations. In March, Women's History Month, this convocation highlights the contributions of women. In 2019, Dr. Edwin Johnson and others proposed that the Women's Convocation be renamed the Dr. Rosalyn Terborg-Penn Women's History Month Convocation. Say that fast. President Wilson agreed, and in 2019, the inaugural Terborg-Penn Women's History Month Convocation was born. In brief, Dr. Terborg-Penn taught at Morgan over 35 years in the Department of History. Her research interests were African and African American women's history. Her scholarship pioneered the formation of what we now know as Black women's history as a credible and legitimate subfield within history. Thus, this convocation seeks to honor the legacy of gender-focused scholarship as innovated by Dr. Terborg-Penn, as well as the importance of celebrating African American history and culture as envisioned by President Richardson. In 2023, the centennial of the Rosewood, Florida massacre, we pause to commemorate the lives of African American men, women, and children who were brutally murdered as a result of false information about an interracial assault. Our presenter, Gloria Brown Marshall Esquire, posits the question, she took justice. What are you fighting for? So this is a challenge to our students, faculty, staff, alumni, and general audience to open your ears to hear what's being asked of you in this hour, in the centennial year of Rosewood, and on this campus and in this moment. In closing, Morgan's trailblazing initiative is establishing a year-round celebration comes at a propitious moment in the history of the university at a time when the student body, with the fervor and enthusiasm of the students of the 60s and the 70s, are reaching out for self-knowledge and self-identity, has urged the university to teach more about itself. This is one of those teaching moments. The university has responded admirably. The Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program is expanding their course offerings into general education for all Morgan students. You don't have to be a girl to learn about gender. So we encourage all of our student population, regardless of your pronouns or how you identify, to consider the Gender Studies Sexuality program. Also, in the midst of the pandemic, the convocations went virtual, and now we're in a hybrid mode. There are people streaming online, and Maryland Public Television is here as well. So it's very important that we're now expanding off of the campus. Continuing in the tradition of Dr. Woodson, Dr. Richardson, and Dr. Rosalyn Terborg-Penn, finally, all convocation content is available by visiting the Morgan State University YouTube channel. I would now like to acknowledge that in the midst of having changed the name from Women's Convocation to honoring Dr. Terborg-Penn, there is also a scholarship attached to her name. If you are a history student, there is a honors ability to apply for a scholarship. Our 2023 recipient is Mrs. Lisette Abdurrahman. She's a doctoral student in the Department of History. She sends her regrets she could not be here today. She's taken her class to Hopkins University for special collections to learn about library research. Congratulations, Mrs. Abdurrahman. I would now like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Umizinwa, who is a doctoral candidate from the Department of English, to introduce our speaker in the next level of our program. Mrs. Umizinwa.
Gloria J. Brown Marshall was a fall 2022 resident fellow at the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School, as well as a visiting professor at HKS. Professor Brown Marshall is a writer, activist, and professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, where she teaches classes in constitutional law, race and the law, evidence, and gender justice. Professor Brown Marshall taught in the Africana Studies program at Vassar College prior to John Jay College. Brown Marshall is a civil rights attorney who litigated cases for Southern Poverty Law Center in Alabama, Community Legal Services in Philadelphia, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, Inc. She was a law clerk to Judge Hudson of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, as well as Judge Takieff of the Court of the Common Pleas in Philadelphia, and a summer intern to Judge Wiener of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. She studied political science at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria. Gloria has written many books and articles. Her book, She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law and Power, is about the Black woman's journey from Queen Zinga to today's activist. Gloria weaves true stories of legal history. Gloria has an upcoming docuseries titled She Took Justice to accompany the book. She authored The Voting Rights War and Race Law in American Society, 1607 to present, a book that discusses race in education, voting rights, Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. Gloria J. Brown Marshall was a featured expert in 8 documentaries, including Harriet Tubman, Visions of Freedom, and Making Frederick Douglass, as well as Let the World See, about Minnie Till and the murder of her son, Emmett Till. Gloria Brown Marshall is a playwright with 7 produced plays. Her recent play, Shot, Caught a Soul, depicts a Black teen hunting the white police officer who shot him. And Dreams of Emmett Till takes that tragic encounter into the 21st century. She attended the Masters of Fine Arts program in playwriting at Sarah Lawrence College, as well as the Commercial Theater Institute's 14-week Broadway producing program. Brown Marshall is working on a stage play titled Crossroads, about murderous white rage and Black ambition. Professor Brown Marshall is an award-winning legal correspondent selected for a Pulitzer Center grant. She covers the U.S. Supreme Court and has received many awards for her work of equality under law. She has had the honor of being an invited panelist for the National Archives, Constitutional Center, and colleges across the country. She has addressed audiences in France at the American Library in Paris. She met with the Secretary of State and Secretary of Culture in Luanda, Angola, while conducting research there on Queen Zinga. She was an exchange scholar to England's Bramshill Police College and presented an intervention before the Human Rights Committee on the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, on racial justices in the American criminal justice system. She has also spoken on issues of law and justice, as well as literature nationally and in London, Paris, Geneva, Johannesburg, Berlin, and Kigali. Finally, Gloria J. Brown Marshall's work has been honored with the Ida B. Wells Barnett Justice Award, Malcolm X Award, NAACP Community Service Award, and the Wiley College Women of Excellence in Law Award. She is a member of the Dramatists Guild, Mystery Writers of America, National Association of Black Journalists, PEN American Center, PEN International, Society of Professional Journalists, ASALA, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, the National Bar Association, and the National Press Club. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Gloria Marshall. 1 minute before she comes up here, we're going to watch a short video and then we'll have a presentation. Thank you.
I wrote She Took Justice, the Black Woman Law and Power, because I've been researching and writing over several years. And I started to see these Black women's stories in which she was either a plaintiff or defendant, or she was using law to liberate herself or using law to liberate her community, challenging unfair laws based on race and gender. And I said, why don't I know more about these stories? And the more I researched, the more I saw that it began hundreds of years ago. In each of these cases, I saw time and time again women who defied the odds, who said, I don't care what your law says. I am a full human being. And they then would bring their own laws, demanding their freedom. They would also challenge the laws themselves, or they would say, I know what the criminal consequences are. I know that they could be beaten, they could be jailed, they could be killed, and yet they decided to stay precedent. She Took Justice is inspiring for our young people. They need to know that these women existed, that Queen Insignia, the warrior queen in Angola, fought the Portuguese to try to stop the slave trade. Women, that the Black witches of Salem existed, that it was empowering to have Phyllis Wheatley, the first Black female poet who was published in North America, to have to prove that she's creative. That creativity, that brilliance is what we see in the work of Toni Morrison today. Once we know the full rounded version of American history, we have a better understanding of ourselves. We're seeing Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, we see Beyonce, we see Michelle Obama, we see Misty Copeland, Prima Ballerina, we see these women today, the Williams sisters, and so many others. They are part of history. They are the creation for many generations of women. They just happen to have been given the opportunity to shine. Their opportunity, their existence, that is something that we can learn from, based on the past, in the present, so that we can make a better future. Each one of us needs to take justice. And if She Took Justice, we see example after example of these stories.
Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, we see Beyonce, we see Michelle Obama, we see Misty Copeland, Prima Ballerina, we see these women today, the Williams sisters, and so many others. They are part of history. They are the creation from many generations of women. They just happen to have been given the opportunity to shine. Their opportunities, their existence then is something that we can learn from, based on the past, in the present, so that we can make a better future. Each one of us needs to take justice. And in She Took Justice, we see example after example, true stories of women who did just that. I also wanted to mention that Dr. Penn is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and a charter member of the Columbia chapter. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Ida Jones, Dr. Jones. Thank you for coming out. And I am so proud to be a Black woman right now. Excuse me. I am very proud to be a Black woman. I am actually a very proud African-American female. I feel like I have been an African-American woman for lifetime after lifetime. For those of you who may or may not believe that you were here before, if I was here before, I was a Black woman. So just to let you know, I feel very comfortable in my skin. I want to say thank you for Dr. Terborg-Penn. I remember meeting her at an NAACP talk I gave in Howard County. And I was giving this talk, and I saw this very fierce woman, as I had seen her in conferences and other places. And she was the type of person that, you were always wondering if you were dressed properly. She was a person who was very strict in ways in which she wanted to carry herself as a professional, as a professor, as a woman, and someone who was fighting for us to have a sense of ourselves and a confidence. And that's what I really want our young Black women to have, and our men. I want us to have a confidence that comes from inside of ourselves, an empowerment that comes from inside of ourselves. And I think that's very important because we all have this one life to live, and we have to live it with a sense that we are important to the world, that we have something to offer. And I truly believe that the study of Black history during this time period, I am also on the board of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And what began as Negro History Week, as was pointed out, became Black History Month. It was created by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in February because that was the month that contained the birth dates of both Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass. The creation of Women's History Month has been a creation that's been ongoing. We had our National Women's Day yesterday, and that International Women's Day was created because women marched in the streets to get rights back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And in the early 1900s, it was decided that after many tragedies, women needed to have a day in which they would be recognized. So internationally, March 8th is considered International Women's Day. I want us to understand that in our working one generation after another, it's not that we have to recreate the wheel. It's not a matter of men versus women. It's not sometimes even a matter of Black versus white. What we're finding in this journey of ours in life is that our history, based on Sankofa, the philosophy of that Ghanaian word Sankofa, to look at our past, to better understand our present, to build a better future. We're all trying to build better futures. I think a lot of it is based on our history that people may or may not want to know. I think it's important, especially right now, when we have legislative bodies, state and local, across this country, trying to take away Black history. And I want us to understand, if they're trying to diminish or take away Black history, to undermine it, don't you think women's history is coming next? When you think about what happened regarding civil rights, the Voting Rights Act, and other parts of legislation that would protect the progress of African Americans, and then soon after that, we had the attacks on women's rights. We can't sit back and think just because we're looking at one group today that the next group will not be in peril. But what gives me hope is looking at history and connecting what happened in the past to what we can do here in the present, and then plan for a better future. And I don't have much time, so I'm going to try to use it well. And I'm going to give you about 400 years of history in about 8 minutes. So let's really start in the beginning. Our history does not begin with slavery. It begins in Africa. And this is from Angola, because I traveled there in 2019 and traveled there again last year to study Queen Nzinga. Queen Nzinga was born about 1583. She was the princess of the Ngola, the king, in what is now called Angola, but back then it was Ndongo. And she watched her father, if you can imagine her, a little girl watching her father navigate the egos and the conflicts between all of these people under his charge as king, in a landmass some people have said was as big as Maryland, or maybe even larger. She watched him to see how he would diplomatically deal with all of the different economic and social pressures, and especially given the fact the Portuguese had started to invade their land. They had already invaded South America, and they crossed the Atlantic and first came as explorers and then decided to come back as conquerors. She watched them little by little begin to foment conflict between the different ethnic groups and tribes until they were at war with themselves. Remember, divide and conquer has been used for centuries, pitting one group against another, undermining one group in order to get the other group to follow. We need to understand that it was in 1622, that her brother, who had then risen to the point of king, the Angola, sent his sister Nzinga to negotiate a peace treaty with the Portuguese. 1622, a black woman, this African woman, is negotiating a peace treaty. Young ladies, I want you to understand, she walked into that room and all of her regalia. She is a princess. She is the sister of the king. And these men, these Portuguese, in their high back chairs, put a mat on the floor. So she was supposed to negotiate this peace treaty between the Ndongan people and the Portuguese sitting on the floor as they sat in chairs. Did she do it? No. She clapped her hands, and her maidservants came and gave their backs. They leaned down, and on their backs, she sat, using their backs as a chair, and negotiated that peace treaty with the Portuguese. This is not inspiration, something I made up. The United Nations has records of Queen Nzinga. There's even a letter that she wrote to the Vatican in the 1600s. When you hear this type of history, when you know that when the Portuguese failed to live up to their side of the treaty, she went to war against them because the Portuguese had been kidnapping Africans. Those kidnapped Africans then through ships and all types of travails become the 20 and odd Africans who arrive on the shores of Virginia in what is now Hampton, who become our Adam and Eve. We need to understand that Mary and Anthony Johnson, two of those Angolan Africans, then have land and children, servants of their own. Did you know in the 1600s that in Virginia, Mary and Anthony Johnson not only had African, they had European servants of their own. Yes, in the 1600s. And then the laws changed. And my area is law. I then follow the law. And when you follow the law, you'll follow the power. So not every one of you has to be someone who goes into law, but everyone should pay attention to what happens in law, because this country is the most litigious nation on the planet. We have more laws, more lawsuits, more courts, and more lawyers than any other country in the world. And yet, we have a constitution. Do we ever read it? Do you know what's in it? You'll say, I have rights. Do you know what those rights are? So those of you who are taking law classes, pay more attention. Ask more questions about your law rights, your legal rights, about the law, because they changed the law and drove Mary and Anthony Johnson out of the Virginia colony. That didn't stop us. That didn't stop us. We continue to push and to fight. But you know, they passed another law in 1669 in Virginia that said if an African is beaten to death by a European, there would be no felony conviction against the European. That's how long Africans and people of African descent have been killed with impunity in this country, from 1669. But that didn't stop us. We kept pushing. We kept trying. People say, well, I don't want to hear about all the bad news. I don't want to tell you about all the bad news. Let me tell you a couple of good stories. One of them is Mum Bet. And this happened in 1781. He's like, oh, 1781, that was so long ago. Yes, it was. But I want you to consider this. Here is an enslaved woman who's been beaten by her slave mistress. The woman she is supposed to care for all the time has this horrible temper. Not only does she beat Mum Bet, but she also beats her sister. Mum Bet is going through the town square, going shopping, and then she hears people say, wait a minute. We have a Declaration of Independence. We have a Constitution. This is a woman who can neither read nor write, and she's enslaved. Do you know what she does? This is how bad Black women are. Even in the midst of oppression, she walks by a lawyer's office and walks in and hires an attorney to represent her. This is in the 1700s. Are you that bold? Are you? I want you to think about the courage that it takes for someone who is enslaved to walk into a lawyer's office and say, I want to sue my slave master. and she wins in the 1700s. I want us to understand what the power of history is in connection to our lives. What was she fighting for? She took justice. For those people in journalism, what are you fighting for? I want you to know about Esther McCready, and you probably already do. She was here in Maryland. And Esther McCready was someone who was, no, she was in nursing. Esther McCready was in nursing. And Esther McCready said, I want to go to nursing school at the University of Maryland. There was a time the University of Maryland would not allow a Black woman to attend. The person who trained the first Black U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Thurgood Marshall, was Charles Hamilton Houston. Charles Hamilton Houston then takes her case. He is sick. He probably believes he is dying, but he took her case anyway. And the case goes to the U.S. Supreme Court, and he forces the University of Maryland to allow Esther McCready to attend. For those of you in journalism, I want you to know about Lucille Bluford. She's in Kansas City. She graduates from the top of her class from the University of Kansas. She wants to go to graduate school, as many of you may want to go to graduate school, the University of Missouri. The University of Missouri's journalism school is the first journalism school. It's the top-rated journalism school, and she wants to attend graduate school there. She applies. They send her a letter that says, yes, you have excellent grades. However, we're not going to admit you because you are a Negro. That's how it was back then on its face. I want you to understand this because she then, of course, was devastated. She was working at the Kansas City Call, the Black newspaper, and she applied again. This time, she had an attorney with her. She brought a lawsuit. What happens? Unfortunately, the University of Missouri decided they would rather close the school than admit her. They actually closed the school rather than admit one Black woman. I want you to understand that now there is a scholarship at the University of Missouri named after her. So she took justice. She didn't just stand back and say, I give up. She kept pushing. The entire school of journalism, apologized to her for the offense of generations past because she was bold enough to stay in the game. I want you to think about the next time it's cold outside and you don't want to go to class. The next time you have homework and you really don't feel like doing it. I want you to think about this young man named George Armwood. You probably don't know his name, but you should, because he was the George Floyd of his day. He was the Freddie Gray of his day. George Armwood in 1933 was accused of molesting a white woman, and he was nowhere near her. She didn't even see the face of the person who did it. And some people said they weren't sure that anything had actually happened at all. And yet, not only did they arrest George Armwood, but when he was in jail, a mob of over 1,000 attacked the jail and dragged him out, beat him, shot him, and then burned him alive. In Maryland, Prince Anne County. I don't want you to feel hatred for anyone, but I want you to understand this. Just as we had George Floyd's life before us to teach us how far our society needed to go, we need to know that George Armwood existed. And it was women who took up his case. It was women who decided they would not allow this travesty to go unknown. Women in Maryland, women across the country forced the government to do an investigation. Of course, eventually they said, oh, We're not sure how he died. We're not sure of the cause of death. If you can believe this, this is in the 1900s. I want you to understand how far we've come. And every time you want to think about giving up, would George Armwood want the opportunities you have? Would he want to be able to go to class, to learn, to take the time to study? There are so many opportunities that were lost to those in generations past, and so many opportunities you have today based on the lives and livelihoods that were given in order for us to be here today. You have so much power, and I thank you for allowing me to speak truth to power. She took justice because she wanted to be the best person she could be. She took justice, Queen Nzinga did, because she wanted to save her land and her people. She took justice because she wanted us to feel pride in ourselves. Esther McCready did. She took justice, Lucille Bluford, because she wanted to find out just how much she had inside of her as a journalist that she could put forward in writing and being the best person she could be, the best professional she could be. She took justice because she wanted to have solidarity among women. She took justice because she wanted you to know your full power. She fought. And what are you fighting for?
We're now going to have a second part of our program where I'll do a quick Q&A with Miss Gloria Brown Marshall. And then if anybody has any questions, we're going to have a microphone roaming, and you can stand up to my right here where you can ask questions as well. So we're going to do about 2 questions, and I'm definitely encouraging you to make use of her in terms of things that might have stimulated your thought processes. So on my right, your left, we're going to do some question and answers. So give us about 10 minutes, and then you're able to join in. Okay. So, I think I'm on. Yes. So, as a former journalism major, I would like for you to discuss for us the connection between the legal profession, the Black press, and the HBCU community in the 19th century, and how that synergy brought about what we call the modern civil rights movement.
Well, thank you. I actually write for the Afro, and because I grew up with the Kansas City Call and with other Black newspapers, I know the importance of the Black newspaper. When I do my research for my books, for this one and many other ones, I go look at the archives from the 1900s to look at what the Black press wrote. And even for the lynching of George Armwood, I went to the Afro archives and online to see what they wrote about it. And many times they were the only reporters on the scene because they were looking for what we needed to know as a community. And so I think it's very important for us to understand the perspectives of what's considered the Black press. I mean, I look at the Griot, I look at, the root.com, look at Black Twitter. I try to follow what it is that we're talking about too. I just want us to know, even for today's consideration of what's a Black press, don't just focus on the entertainment of it. Don't focus on just what, whoever the hip hop star is that's in a fight with some other hip hop star. And also look at what is going on in the news, in law. What are the criminal cases? What is taking place? I live in New York City. I think about the massacre, as was pointed out, that the massacre, we talked about Rosewood, but we had the massacre in Buffalo, New York, of someone who walked into a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and began to kill people to spark a race war. Are you paying attention? Do you know what's going on as far as these cases go? So I think law has played, it depends on how you look at law. I think the criminal justice system is attuned to modern day slavery. And during the time period of the 1900s, we saw the connection clearer than we do now because people get distracted. This country has 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's incarcerated population. 25%. A quarter of all the incarcerated people in the world are incarcerated in this country. We have the highest number of incarcerated women. And something that was told to me that we would probably in the 1900s in journalism have probably investigated more, but we don't have investigative journalists for the Black press the way we did in the 1900s. And so a lot of what we get as far as news is second and third hand, curated by other people. And we don't know how much of that is, Russian bots or whatever it may be, but we don't have the type of investigative journalism. But I do know from my own work that I've been talking and asking questions that there, a white corrections officer said to a white female who was a liberal who went back and told me, so this is hearsay from a certain point. She said the corrections officer told her, every Black male we put behind bars is one less Black baby born. So I want you to think about that.
That's a very good point. So one has to inquire, interrogate, what does wokeness look like? We use that term. I know you talked about it. So I think our young people love this idea, what I call performative wokeness. So there's protesting, there's clothing, there's art, there's language. But what does wokeness mean in terms of the elevation of one's mind to be a good steward of this history and this legacy? Could you give me a formula for that, or our students?
Well, for me, I think this idea, and this is one thing when Dr. Terborg-Penn heard me speak, I ended my talk at the NAACP in Howard County with "Stay Woke," and she kind of shivered. And so this was like years ago, before the word was being used as much as it is right now. For me, it is being aware of staying in touch, connecting the dots, understanding as with the philosophy of Sankofa, what history we're reliving right now. And we're in the midst of reliving history because you're young people, you're seeing this for the first time. This is not the first time that we've had this pushback against Black progress. As soon as we have great progress, look for the pushback. And that's not just for the activists in the room, that's for anyone. When you get into a position of power, look for those people who are going to try to push you back to where you were before. So it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so if you're not aware, if you're not woke, if you don't see the hands behind the curtain manipulating the situation, then you're going to start from ground zero. History will show you, if you learn from it, it will give you strategies. It will give you inspiration, and it will also help you to understand that this is not the first rodeo, and we have survived more than this. And not only have we survived, but as you can see from where you are, we have learned to thrive. So don't give up, because this is a war of attrition. Being woke means you understand that you're in a situation in which there are people who are competing with you. We are competition, and we are powerful competition, and have been since the 1600s. And that's why they keep creating laws and other ways to undermine our power. So staying woke means you are aware that you're in a situation in which you have something people want. I'll give this quick example. For those people who are from Nigeria, I went to graduate school during the summer at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. And I remember taking a political science class in colonialism. And it was very similar. The idea of the colonial powers, the French, the English, the Dutch, the Spanish, all wanting parts of Africa back. They wanted to control it. So even though the Africans were pushing forward and making progress, there was always some undermining of that progress. And so it's not just you. Don't think, oh, it's woe is me. Everyone always wants to talk about the negative and how everybody attacks us and hates us. There's always going to be somebody. I hate to break this to you. I know everybody here should be over 18. Not everybody's going to like you. I know not everybody will. I'm sorry. If I'm the first one to tell you that, forgive me. Forgive me. Not everybody is going to like you. And so there are going to be people who dislike you for no reason. Women, did we get a shout out? Okay, we're going to have, okay? So now think about this systemically. Think about it systemically, that you have power and people are competing against you. If you're not aware that you're in a competition, that there are people competing against you, then when you see these things happen, in addition to the other things that could be happening, based on any number of, ideas that other people have about other people in their minds, you can't change the minds of all these other people. You can only be the best person you can be, and that's what history shows us. Be the best person you can be, work as hard as you can, put forward, you're going to make mistakes, you're human. Understand not everybody's going to like you, but also understand you're in a competition. And the law is being used on the side of those who want to undermine our progress. Pay attention to the Supreme Court, pay attention to the way law is used, especially the criminal justice laws, because the criminal justice laws are the modern day slave laws. They've taken off, for those people who don't have it on its face, they've taken off the face of it. But if you go back and read the laws of my Race, Law, and American Society book, you can read what the laws were on their face. For the most part, they took off the language of race, kept the laws. And so that's why you still have the same outcomes, even though we have more police officers who are African American, we have more women in positions of power, we have more judges who are people of color. But why are we having the same outcomes? Because the laws are the same. So you are changing the people, but if the law stays the same and they're in law enforcement, then you're going to have very similar outcomes generation over generation.
Very good. Another two questions. You mentioned distractions, and I want you to talk about that very briefly. But I also want to give a crash course. I wanted to be a lawyer. I was supposed to replace Thurgood Marshall, but that went away with bubblegum and all that other stuff. But so can you talk about the nullification of states? Because I think that's very important. When you hear her talk about law, you think I'm an American citizen. I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm an American. I have rights. But what we have done in the past in this country is states will seek to nullify federal law. So if you can talk about that a little bit, because Maryland's doing some things now, even though it says itself blue, but it's kind of quasi purpley reddish in some parts of the state. I haven't really figured it out. We have some lawyers in the audience, Pace McConkey and others who could probably help us with that. But can you talk about distractions first of all? How do you live a woke life in the midst of distractions? And then also can you talk about the nullification of federal law by various states, Florida, Georgia, Texas in particular, and then some New England states. So it's not always in the South. Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and that's my region of the country. So things happen on both sides of the aisle. So could you talk about those two things, Peter?
Well, not being distracted. When you watch a program, whether or not it's online streaming, and you see a commercial, that commercial is paying for that program so that you watch the commercial. It's not about the program. The program is only there to get you to watch the commercial. For those of you who didn't realize that, that commercial is there. That is the core. That is what they want, to have the commercial. Because once you watch the commercial, one after another, then the product has a better chance of being sold. And so the distraction is for you to be distracted by the content of the show so that you stay long enough to watch the commercial. So how many distractions are needed for you to watch the commercial?
That's good. That's good.
Think about how many games do you have to play for you to watch the commercial? I want us to understand that this is a capitalist country. People are here to make money. And my sense of it is, though, that if people are too aware, they begin to ask questions. I want you to go back to the time period of enslavement and think about this. that it was against the law for an enslaved person to learn how to read. It was against the law, punishable by death, because it was considered if a person who was meant for labor alone opened their mind by learning how to read, they would never be the same. That they would then begin to question. They begin to see things differently. They began to ask, as Frederick Douglass did, why am I enslaved? What has caused this condition to happen? They become disgruntled and they want more out of life. So the distraction is to keep you from thinking, to keep one from questioning, and to make sure that they stay in these positions of servitude where they think everything is fine and I'm comfortable in what I have. Reading, learning, as you begin to open your mind, you become less comfortable with the status quo, especially young people. Your job as young people is to make sure that the lives going forward are better than the ones you entered, so that you are now working forward, keeping your mind open for generations unborn. I'm here because people who never knew my name sacrificed their lives and livelihoods to have this, to have us here. Our job then is to stay aware enough to know what is freedom like for the unborn 20 years from now. By the year 2045, this country is going to be majority people of color. The US Census decided this, knew this 10, 15, I knew it 15 years ago. By the year 2045, this country is going to be majority people of color. And right now, the forces are aligning to make sure they stay in power no matter what the population numbers are. So when we talk about being woke, when we talk about thinking things through and being aware, are you ready to assume the leadership positions in 15 years? Are you ready to be willing to do the battle that's necessary with mind, with strategy, with creativity? Are you preparing yourselves for positions of power and leadership? And to do that for the future, you have to be aware and not distracted now. If you're spending all your time playing video games and streaming and this, it's like, oh, this is great. They'll say this is wonderful. And we can just slip right in and keep our positions of power, and they'll never know the power they're giving away. So being aware and not being distracted is very important. But then the nullification question comes in for those people who are aware and are saying, I do want to exercise my constitutional rights. I do want to be a full-fledged first-class US citizen. And so the states, because the majority of states are being led by conservative governors, they are looking at ways in which the states can maintain more power. Under the Constitution, there's this phrase called the provision, the Supremacy Clause. Under the Supremacy Clause of the US Constitution, the federal law is the supreme law of the land. That's what the Constitution says. But right now we have a supermajority on the US Supreme Court. And that supermajority of conservatives are in a position to help nullify or support nullification of that very doctrine, or at least carve it out in a way in which states have more rights. But unfortunately, here's how it works. For those states that are led by liberal governors, they've figured out ways to undermine those rights that are put forward by liberal governors and expand the rights in states put forward by conservative governors. And so this hypocrisy, which is basically what it is, that we see in the Supreme Court is something that we have to be aware of. At the same time, the Supreme Court is the law of the land, or creates the law of the land, is the co-equal branch of government, co-equal to all of Congress, these 9 people on the US Supreme Court. And I want you to pay attention to them. We know about people in Congress. We know about their lives. We know about Nancy Pelosi's husband. We know about these different things. What do we know about our Supreme Court justices? During the vetting process, they're asked questions. Most of them don't give us full answers. They sit for life. US Supreme Court justices are in their positions for life. Many of them live into their 80s. Most of them are in their late 40s, early 50s, now, especially the conservatives. So they're going to be in control of or being able to have access to the power to create the law of the land for possibly your adult lives, at least 30 to 40 years, if the same composition of the court remains. So I think unfortunately, what we're going to have to figure out, and people are looking at how U.S. Supreme Court justices don't sit for life. How do we limit their tenure on the court? And that's something I hadn't really thought about, wanted to think about before, because what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If you start limiting conservatives on the court as far as their tenure, that's also going to be the limits you have for those who are considered liberals on the court. We need to know that those dissenting opinions today could be those opinions that are the opinions of the majority tomorrow. That's what Justice Ginsburg said.
So thank you for that. So if anybody has any questions, I'm going to have Ms. Umezinwa take the microphone for me, or you can come up, Ms. Knight. Oh, you have one?
Hi.
Use the microphone there.
Hello. I have a couple of questions for you, actually. Um, you started off your presentation with Princess Nzinga and another young lady from University of Missouri, I believe, or Missouri's Journalism School of Journalism in
Yes.
1933. And I originally thought you were just a women's African American activist, being as though this is a women's convocation. But then you ended with Mr. George. And I was just curious to know what inspired you to become an African American activist, but not just women? Like, was there a specific life event? Was it just you since a young age? Or I just want to know what inspired you to become an activist. And you mentioned leadership positions. And I also want to know, how many events would you say you're invited to per year to do things like this? And then my third question, I'm sorry. You mentioned you went to school in Nigeria. I'm a senior here at Morgan, and I also wanted to do grad school in Nigeria. I wanted to know if you were able to transfer your African credits back to the American soil.
Well, thank you so much. I'll answer the last question first. And it was a school program. So you have study abroad programs here, and your study abroad program will allow you to study in other countries. And you can study for a semester or for a summer or for a shorter period. It all depends on your particular program. I would really support a study abroad program. I did this back in my graduate years, back in 19, and I still talk about it. I'm still talking about it now. This is something that will stay with you for a lifetime. It will look great on your CV or resume. It's something that gives you like an extra bonus as far as life experience. And because your school is sending you there, your school then, of course, accepts the credits. The reason why I talked about George Armwood, just because he was the George Floyd of his day, but also because this was a strategy between activists, NAACP, and other groups led by women. Because so many Black men had been arrested back then and still today, because it's this assumption that there was an attack on a white woman. And I'm not saying that people of African descent are angels. I'm not saying we never do anything. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that when it comes to the criminal justice system, the disparity in who's approached by law enforcement, who's questioned by law enforcement, who's arrested, who's held overnight, who then the prosecutors decide to charge as opposed to let go, who then is convicted, who receives any type of since afterwards, if it's a drug involved conviction of care through rehabilitation programs. All of this is race-based, and you could see it. But we can't have one group men, another group women, not working together when it comes to criminal justice. They work together. We work together in the George Onward case. We work together in criminal justice cases before. And when we have those protests, go back and look at those film clips from protests, and you see probably the majority of the people protesting are women on behalf of men. And so we need to work together. I also believe that without working together, and our community is so unique because of the parity between men and women. We were brought here together. We were under the lash together. We faced segregation together. And we need to continue to work together. Our communities need to understand wherever we are, we're in this together. Whether or not you've been here for 5 years, 50 years, or your family has 5 generations in the United States, we are in this together. We need to better understand our history, to understand that we are powerful together. I want you once again to remember what that corrections officer said. Putting that black male behind bars, one less baby born. Undermining the black family, the black economy, our black futures. So we have to be in this together. And so I see a larger picture because I work on history, and I know that we've been through many things. Our history is so bright. I want us to think about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson on the U.S. Supreme Court, just a little ways from here. The first black female lawyer, Charlotte Ray, was in 1872. The first black female U.S. Supreme Court justice was in 2022, 150 years later. We need to understand, I think, also that these wonderful achievements we've been able to make are being made because we're working on these things together. And I want us to understand I wouldn't be here but for my late husband, who worked with me to try to get me to have my light shine. So I like a black man, but I want us to understand. But I want us to understand that together, whatever way we can work together, we should. And this brings up one little issue that's, I think, is part of your question as well. As women, as we go forward, the strong black woman is often seen as something negative. The strong black woman is the reason why we're here right now. The strong black woman is what kept this community together and what continues to keep our communities together. Our mothers, our grandmothers, our aunties, our neighbors are the reason why we are here today, be it male or female. The reason why we are here today is because of the strong black woman. And if you give a black woman a task to do, you'll see it done. So, yes, so we're in this together.
Next question, sweetie.
Hi, so sorry. My name's Kayla Holt, and on behalf of the Claire I. Adams Honors Council, College, and Morgan State University, I wanted to first say thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. Your speech was powerful, and your outfit is beautiful. You did mention young people and working together as a community for us. And so I wanted to ask you, how can young Black people stay and use their collective voice to navigate the politics of America? Again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you. I am so honored you're here. My goodness. Young people have always created the movements necessary to change society. That's part of your job as young people, because you have the creativity full force. I see myself as a creative person, but I have to juggle so many other things. Dr. Jones is a creative person, but we're juggling many things. Your ability to just have the time to think creatively about the problems or obstacles you're facing gives you an advantage over me. You have the opportunity, if you open your eyes, to see what are the concerns in your community and how can they be addressed. And those concerns then will be addressed if you set your mind to them and take then all the resources you have from other generations, from the books that have been written, from what people have done in other situations. And that's how you create change. The political landscape is there for you to take. What happened during the pandemic was older people stayed home. You saw the young people in the streets. You saw the young people learning how politics worked. I think it's also very important that when you think about it, sometimes our young people can be a little on the arrogant side. And they think, well, I know everything because I know how to work your laptop and you don't. Having that access to technology is a wonderful thing unless it's also a distracting thing. If it undermines your self-confidence because you start looking at what everybody else has and you feel you should have that too. If you get off the road, off the journey. So I think it's also an overwhelming thing for young people to believe they can change the entire world all at once. Sometimes it's best to look at one part and focus on that one part. Learn skills from that one part of politics. Have a chance, if you've probably done this already, go down to Congress and watch them work. Have you been there? Have you visited the Supreme Court since it's reopened? It's so close. You will feel empowered just taking that trip to Congress, sitting there and watching them do their jobs, and knowing that everyone in there is on the federal government payroll using your tax dollar. I want you to feel empowered when you look at your paycheck and you see state, local, and federal taxes taken out of your paycheck, and know that that state money is going for this state of Maryland. That federal money is going to the U.S. Congress. That local money is going to your local community. Once you realize you're paying the salaries, literally paying the salaries of these people, then don't you want to know where your money is going? Follow the money and you'll follow the power. The last thing I'll say for young people, vote. Many young people figure out ways that voting doesn't matter. If your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't have spent over 150 years taking your vote away from you. Are you voting? Are you paying attention to the issues? You want political power. You want to lead me. I want you to know what you're doing. If you're going to be in a leadership position in which you're going to have control over my life, I need you to pay attention to what's going on in the world. Do you want the power, but do you want the responsibility? Do you want the power? Because with power comes responsibility. And that means being responsible enough to know what's going on in your communities and in your world so that you'll know that you have to vote and you have to get others to vote as well. And that is political power. Running for office. How many of you are going to run for office? How many of you are great? And in preparing to run for office, not just be the one who knows how to glad hand and shake hands and may have that beautiful smile, but also know what the issues are of concern to your peers and your parents. The issues of concern to your peers and your parents. Not just what's of concern to young people, but also what's of concern to your grandparents. So when you have this political power, the power they don't want you to have, you need to use it wisely. You need to understand what it means, and you need to understand that you'll represent more than yourself. Each time you go to vote, you represent more than yourself. You represent me and other people in your community. You represent your parents. You represent other people who have given their lives and livelihoods to vote, but also other people who are relying on you to understand their concerns so that when you do vote, when you do use your power, you're using it effectively for our community.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like everyone to join me to give a standing ovation because learning has occurred. I'm a professor of history, and if you would like to join me, just give an outstanding clapping offering. Thank you very much. Thank you. I wasn't going to ask a question because learning occurred, but for the question from the young lady here about the possibility of credit transfer, and I say, yes, you can. For each one of you, yes, you can transfer credits. Indeed, we have signed many agreements with universities across Africa. And by the way, I'm the executive director of Office of Global Partnerships Africa for Morgan State University. My name is Akin Tijani. I'm a tenured professor, history, and Terborg-Penn, I call her Mama Penn, because when I joined in 2006, Morgan as a tenure track associate professor, she was one of the, I believe there were 4 women in the history department, but she was outstanding, reaching out to mentor us, the men or the young boys, as of 2006. Fast forward, you can, and I should also add that President Wilson was the first commencement speaker at the first institution in Nigeria where we signed an MOU at Adeleke University in Ede, Osun State. If you've heard about Davido, for all of you, some of you know Davido, his father owned that university. And President Wilson was there to give the first commencement speech, where he also did something honorable for the students. I worked there. I was a pioneer dean. I was a pioneer deputy vice chancellor of that university before returning back to Morgan. So you can, and then lastly, we just recently appointed a director of study abroad, Maria. I've forgotten her last name. So if you come to the second floor of Richardson Library, where you have all these mini flags, you come in, then we can, discuss. Thank you very much. God bless you. May the soul of Professor Penn rest in peace. And I thank you. I thank the organizers too for this. Thank you.
Thank you for that fitting question. And we're going to, you have a question, Professor
I'll
Dawson?
take one. I was praying that my law class students who promised to come would ask a question, but okay, I'm going to do a quick one. So the Washington Post did an analysis of the AP African American Studies curriculum and the 20 or so terms or ideas that were thrown out. And one of them was the term prison industrial complex. That one was taken out. So, Professor, I thought, I wondered if you had a take on that. If you are a above average student who's taking AP courses because you can handle a deeper dive into history and current events, is that term that scary or radical, or why would you, why did it easily just go out of the curriculum?
Prison industrial complex is a phrase that is a modern day phrase. It used to be called the convict lease system. Is the idea back when slavery was abolished in 1865. It was abolished except as punishment for a crime. So you have people who are now made free, and it triggers the criminal justice system to start arresting and convicting people of African descent, women and men, and then use their labor for free. And the South did this to rebuild the South. Some of you have watched the film, the fictionalized version of the Shawshank Redemption, where you've seen people who are incarcerated tarring roads and working on behalf of private industries. But this is what they did to labor, to people who are of African descent,
for 5 years, they would keep incarcerated under the harshest of treatment and then use their labor, farm it out for free. And so over time, they said that is another form of slavery. So how did they change it? They said, we'll give you 30 cents an hour. So we're paying you 30 cents an hour. And if we pay you anything, then it's not what? Enslavement. So now we have prisons filled with people who are working in industries that won't hire them when they are released, doing the same work behind bars for industries that when they're released say, well, we don't hire people with a felony conviction. So when they could take those that labor, take those products at 30 cents an hour in the payment, they're not going to pay them the $30,000 or $50,000 a year they would deserve with the skill base they've been given through incarceration. That's one side. They build these prisons in places that are pretty rural. Those rural communities then get to count the population within the prisons, within the population of that county. So a very small county with a small population then increases its population by thousands by having the prison there. And with that increased population, going back to the topic we were talking about with politics, that increased population means they have increased local, state, and federal resources. Follow the money. When you follow the money, you follow the power. When you follow the money, you follow the power. So now we have these prisons located in rural areas. The politicians now have the power they wouldn't have because their populations are larger. It is not as though those incarcerated people get to vote or that any of those politicians go to the incarcerated people and say, oh, how can we help you? How can we address your issues? No, their bodies are just being used for political expediency. Now, here's an expansion on that. The corrections officers, the court personnel, the people who are involved in constructing the prison, all of that is part of the economy of that rural community. Now, take the corrections officer. The corrections officer now needs that uniform pressed and dry cleaned. We need a cleaner. He needs a haircut. We need a barber. You have two corrections officers come together, have a little baby corrections officer. Now we need a school. The school needs a teacher. We need somebody to build the school. Where's the child going to play? We need a park. We need somebody to construct a park. Well, we don't want to cook today. We need a fast food place. Now we have fast food franchises popping up in this rural community. All of this is now part of the complex, the prison industrial complex, a society built on maintaining bodies in that prison. They look at people, little ones, in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. Are they beginning to fail? Because if they fail, by the time they get to middle school, they're going to drop out in high school. Chances are very high. And then get in trouble in juvenile court. And now we fill a bed in adult prisons. So that's the public school to prison pipeline. All of this is part of something going back to our history. How many of you have heard of the 3/5 rule? The 3/5 rule, good. The 3/5 rule is in Article 1 of the Constitution. The 3/5 rule says that during the time period of enslavement, enslaved people would be counted as 3/5 of a person to determine the number of representatives in Congress. That young man's going to Congress to figure out the population. The number of people going to Congress based on the population. How do we know it's in the population? If the majority of the people are enslaved or half of the people, we count them as 3/5 of a person to count the number of the population to go to Congress. The same thing is happening today. Look at history, Sankofa. Following this history, they're counting the bodies as they did during the time period of enslavement. They're counting the bodies. They didn't go back into the enslaved people and say, how can we address your issues? I'm counting you. You're in my constituency. No, it's political expediency. Then it's political expediency now. That's why they don't want people to understand and know that the prison industrial complex is helping these small towns who lost their industries during the time period in which there were slowdowns or factories closed and moved overseas or moved to other parts of the country. Now the factory is the prison. and understanding who those imprisoned people are. Going back to what we said before, who do the police stop first? Who do they question? Whom do they take down? Who do they arrest? Who do prosecutors prosecute? How many people get charged? How many people get convicted? Where do they go? So that's why when I tell you, young people, the criminal justice system is the issue that is so identical to slavery today. This is the one when you're talking about should be in your forefront of your mind. It's the criminal justice system. It is undermining our health. It is undermining the ability of our communities to thrive. People are feeding off of our community to maintain an industry that is supplying not just the power they need, but the money they need to maintain superiority over us. Our competition is so powerful and so strong that the criminal justice system is continuing to be used to undermine that competition, to undermine our communities, to undermine our families. I beg of you, young people, please study more about the criminal justice system. Study how you can use your brilliance to think of strategies. You don't have to take it all on at once. Take off different pieces of it, but understand the reason why they don't want AP classes that include the prison industrial complex, because they know how smart people would be in the AP classes. And if they started to learn more about the prison industrial complex, they would begin to come up with strategies that could tear it down. The same way we tore down slavery, the same way we tore down Jim Crow segregation.
And that's such a fitting conclusion, but I have to ask this question. And this is a good place for young people to start about probation. Because in your home state of New York, there's a lot of people who are being arrested and they can't pay for probation. So they now stay in the system. Some of them actually have died in the system because they've been assaulted in the prisons. And so now you're basically almost a ward of the state. Because if the probation is $5,000 or $2,000, you don't have that cash money or collateral to pay for that. They own you because you cannot leave. And then things happen inside of those prisons that now add on more time. So you haven't even seen a judge yet. You haven't even been charged with a crime. You're just basically arrested with cause.
You're talking about bail?
Yes, the bail. Thank you, bail. That's what I'm saying. I'm getting ahead of myself. Thank you, bail. So this idea of this bail, not being able to pay for bail, can you just talk about that very briefly? And this is a very meaty subject for people to grab onto.
There are so many aspects of criminal justice, so many of interest to you. They just, you don't have to be a criminal justice major to see some area in criminal justice that would be of concern to you. And so bail, we had a young man, 17 years old, who was arrested in New York City for stealing a book bag. He said he didn't do it. He said again and again he would not plead guilty. And that's what happens because under our criminal justice system, remember, 5% of the world's population, 25% of the incarcerated world's population. So that means that there aren't enough judges, lawyers, jury systems, court personnel for everyone to have a trial. So prosecutors are always pushing people to plead guilty, even if they didn't do it. If not, then you're going to be held if you can't pay bail. Bail is money or some type of promise, making sure that the person will show up for a trial. But this young man didn't have the $500 for bail. And $500 may seem like a lot, it may seem like a little. He didn't have it. So month after month, 17 years old in an adult jail. You don't even want to think about what this young man went through. And he kept saying, I didn't do it. I don't want to plead guilty. Because for those of you who know, when you fill out your financial aid form, it says on the financial aid form, it asks you about your criminal background on a financial aid form. So he said no. And then what happens in the end? They finally decide that they would allow him to go free. He's out and unfortunately committed suicide because he couldn't handle what he had been through while he was waiting for his trial. They're talking about no money bail. That's one of the issues. So why are we putting up money anyway to guarantee, which most people show up anyway? So what's the idea? Follow the money, follow the power. Follow the money, follow the power. So here we have again this idea of the criminal justice system financing so many other entities, being a part of so many aspects of this capitalist system on the backs of Black people, exploited once again by a country that, instead of investing in our intellect, investing in our energy, investing in our creativity, would rather still invest in our bodies being exploited through one system after another. I leave you with this on a good note, on a positive note. You are so brilliant. I need you to put your passion and your brilliance together with your education, learning more about the issues of concern. She took justice. When you have a chance to read it, and I'm sure they're going to have a book in the library or one of the books here for you to read it. When you get to a point where you are feeling you can't, when it's just too much, and I still remember it from college, I want you to just take this book, flip through the pages, put your finger down, and read one of those stories. These women, in the face of odds we would never understand, stood up and had their voices heard anyway. I want you to always know that history for us, African American history, is history filled with courageous people, wonderful stories, and things that we would say today, how did they do it? And if they could do it back then, I know I can do this today. Not just while you're in college, but as you go forward. Always know our Black history is filled with stories that will inspire you to take the next step, to push forward, to be the best you can possibly be. And how a country treats its women is an indicator of its true moral character. How our community treats a Black woman is going to be up to you.
We have one last question. Yes, please. We have two questions. We're going to go to 12:30. So whoever has the microphone, please stand up. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, I'm Jahari. The first thing I wanted to say, thank you so much for coming. Being able to hear you speak was an amazing opportunity. So I had a question. I wanted to know if you had any advice for specifically young Black men who are trying to support Black women and their voices without coming off as trying to take control or telling them how to do it. So if you had any advice on that, thank you.
I thank you for the question. Thank you so much. One thing remember I said before that we have the closest parity of any group because other groups have more widespread divisions between male and female. We're closer because we've had closer experiences. So sometimes because we are so close in our experiences, we rub in the same area of pain. Here's what I mean. We're going through the same things. And so because we're going through the same things, sometimes we both have pain in the same place at the same time. Who's going to be heard first? So I think what we need to do, both women and men, is to realize that because our pain is located in similar places, we have to take turns. I'm going to listen to you today. I need you to listen to me tomorrow. I want men to understand that if you know racism exists, you've got to accept sexism exists. And too often, women are trying to convince their men that sexism is real. I want you to understand that it is. And it comes at different places at different times. So just listen to her. Yes, women like to talk. Yes, we do. And you just have to listen. Just take a time out just to listen. And you don't always have to fix it. Because sometimes what happens is that men believe they've got to fix it. That if you hear a woman say, oh, this happened to me, you're like, okay, I'm on. What do I need to do? Just listen. Let her talk. It might not be something that she needs for you to fix. She just needs for you to hear. There's a difference between reporting and complaining. She could be just reporting, This is what happened to me. This is what I want you to know. As my partner in crime, I want you to know what happened to me. But, and this is what used to happen with my husband and myself. When we would get, oh my goodness, I should say it was not all good times. Please believe me, it was not. There were some shaky times there, but he knew and I did. If I called on him, he was there. So when it does come to that time, when you are called on, then be there for her in that way. I need you. I need you. Okay, then, all right, where am I? And I'm going to tell you something else. A couple of color, especially an African-American couple, is powerful. Powerful. When my husband and I walked into a room, we walked in, it was power walking in the room. And the way you know the power is that people will turn and look. Power in the room. There's power in a Black couple. Power in it. And that's why they take so many efforts to destroy the Black family. It's power. And when you understand that this Black man, women in the room, wants to be of assistance to you, wants to help you, understand also the history is on his shoulders. Yes, it's on ours too for what we've been through. But the history is also on his shoulders. And he represents to the powers that be something that to many people is a threat. Whether or not that threat is realized or not, it makes people paranoid. It makes them concerned. And so building that sense up of who this man is, take the time out, give him a compliment. Gentlemen, take the time out, give her a compliment, and not just the compliment of her physicality, the compliment of her mind. Because, gentlemen, you get a good Black woman by you, you can go anywhere.
Amen.
You can go anywhere. You get a good Black woman behind you, she will take you further than you ever realized. And I said good Black woman. Okay? I want us to do two other things. I want us to realize that we've all, even in your young lives, have been through some stuff. And we need to sometimes just give ourselves a hug. We need to just be kinder to ourselves. Be good to yourself. And that doesn't always mean buying yourself something. It just means being good and kind and understanding. And sometimes, once a day, forgive somebody of something. Just do it. Because they could be going through something too. Every now and then, things happen and people act out. Just let it go. Just one time, just let it go. So that one day, one time, just let it go. Just allow us to have a little bit more of a leeway. We've been through a lot. We're still going through a lot. If we would be kinder with each other and kinder to ourselves, then our coupling, our families, our togetherness, our love will have more time to grow and to deepen, and we better understand ourselves. My beloved is something one of my mentors used to say. My beloved, if we can love each other just a little bit more, we already have everything else we need. Just add that last ingredient of love, and there's nothing we can't do.
Hello, my name is Tyler Mitchell. First off, I want to say that was a very powerful speech. It reminds me a lot of the late Elijah Cummings when he used to say to have confidence in your competence. And my question is, you were talking about George Armwood, and this happened in Maryland, and I had never heard of it. And so, for you, as someone with a history doctorate, How can people use the internet to find credible news and information that TV doesn't tell you?
Well, I'm a professor in legal history and constitutional law, and I use the internet in ways that look to credible sources. Are the sources credible? The Afro, for example, I was doing research yesterday in which I went to articles from the Afro on George Ormwood in preparation for today. George Ormwood is mentioned in my book. She took justice because of the Black women who would not let the incident die away. And so they pushed until, it became national news. That's why I said it was the George Floyd case of its day. And going back to what was said about AP history, the way in which we don't know about something is if people are allowed to make it disappear. If someone entered this country today, would they even know we had a two-term Black president? Think about how much has been erased as though it never happened that quickly. So the reason why you don't know about George Ormwood is because, and the reason why I wanted to mention it today is because we should know, and we have to continue to look for credible sources that gives us information. The Maryland Archives, I've been to the Maryland Archives here. I've been to the Library of Congress. I've spoken 3 times at the National Archives. I continue to look at newspapers, but not just the white newspapers, but also the Black newspapers. That's why I like that question that Dr. Jones proposed to me about the Black newspapers of the 1900s. We used to read the Black newspapers to get our side of the story because many of the white newspapers did not publish the full truth of things. They published the continued propaganda that would make Black people look bad and always make us look guilty. So that means you have to look at more than one source. You might have to look at the source that's out there that is the more established source. I get the New York Times daily. And there's sometimes I read it and I go, I don't think that it happened exactly this way. When I was at Harvard this past semester, President Zelensky came on Zoom to do a presentation. President Zelensky of Ukraine. And I thought, wow, he's coming to Harvard in the middle of a war. In order, that's how important Harvard is. I got in line to ask him a question. And the question was, if I'd given the chance to ask it, was what about the Black people in Ukraine that weren't allowed to get on the buses to get out of Ukraine when the war started? So that means you have to ask yourself with critical thinking skills, what are some other parts of it? I always ask myself, and where were the Black people? It's like with everything I do, and where are the Black people? And what happened with the Black people? And so you have to ask this, even if you don't see it there, you ask these questions. There's a lynching memorial in Maryland. A lot of the information on Maryland's lynchings are on a website, a lynching memorial website in Maryland, where you can find many of these cases. So also, go to the books that have been written. Go on to any of your search terms that you want to use, the search engines, and put in Black history or attend your Black history classes. Look in your bibliography. And when you look in the bibliography of your textbooks, the bibliography and the index, then you can see all the other books that were used to research that book. And then just see, well, what title interests you and look up that book. But there are many ways. What I find on the internet is that the algorithms give you what you want to know. And it curates it in a way in which you're not using your critical thinking skills. They are. They are thinking for you. Going back to that question regarding distractions. You're going to have to realize you are a person of power. They want your power and they want you distracted. And one way they can take your power is to keep you distracted. So these algorithms that keep giving you, kittens, playing and, and all these like little animals and the little kids dancing and all these other things and what's going on in hip hop today. I'll give you this. Put yourself on a diet. Say that you're going to watch this for 15 minutes and then stop. And if you can't stop in 15 minutes, know that you're hooked, that they have you, that you're being drugged. Because if you can't stop yourself, you can set the alarm. I'm going to watch this for 15 minutes and then I'm going to stop. Or even at the end of the day, how many hours, how much screen time do you have? Are you hooked? Do they have you? Push a man. I just want you to understand that those algorithms are drug dealers, basically, because once again, the more you watch, the more commercials you see. And they're there to sell you the commercials. They're there to sell you the products. They have to keep your attention long enough to sell you the products. So I want you to look at the credible sources on your phone, on your internet, your phone, my phone. We have the libraries of the world in that phone. What are you using that phone for that's carrying the libraries of the world? And I'll end with this. Remember, they used to kill us for reading. Now they don't have to if you don't read.
Okay, so I have the last question. First, I want to let you know that you're a very powerful woman. And I know that you said that there's a lot of power in the Black couple, but you're also a very powerful woman. And when you were walking by to the hall, a lot of people were turning to look at you. I was going to tell you that later. And so my question is going to piggyback just from what you said in your book, She Took Justice, and how you were able to collect the stories. And I know that, misrepresentation and underrepresentation is something that we see every day, especially in how stories are told in the movies and in films, especially with the misrepresentation of the Henrietta Lacks story, which we already agree was a gross misrepresentation. So I want to say that it's very important that you also share your experience with us, because we're not sure if that's part of the book. And do you mind telling us a bit about how you, being a professor and also doubling as a practicing lawyer, how are you able to approach teaching students on the subject of diversity, inclusion, and equity? What are your strategies? There are professors here like myself who want to also benefit from your plethora of information and knowledge from traveling around the world. So definitely we know that you've acquired a lot of multicultural skills. How are you able to approach this topic, being an American and also being widely traveled? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think it's being widely traveled. The opportunities you have to study abroad, please take advantage of them. They are wonderful opportunities, and you get college credit. I mean, you can't beat that. I think that helps. Also, I believe in all voices, all minds. When you take a class with me, I ask this question again and again. What do you think? What do you think? I want you to think through the topic area. Think through the question. What is happening here? These are human beings who are creating law. Law doesn't fall out of the sky. People with a vested interest, with a certain outcome, create laws. Laws are a codification of values. They decided, thou shalt not kill. So now murder is against the law. Thou shalt not steal. So now armed robbery is against the law. You think about what the laws are. It's a codification. First foremost was religious values, and now the values of the people in positions of power. They want certain things. They want a society that looks a certain way, and so therefore they pass certain laws. So when we're thinking about all minds, all voices, my idea is, when I'm teaching, how do we have all minds, all voices? If, for example, in some of my classes, the women don't speak up. So like, why are the women not speaking up? You're thinking something. Why aren't you speaking up? Sometimes, because I'm in New York City, you'll have people who are immigrants not speaking up. Why? Because you have an accent. It's like, well, I have an accent. Everybody has some type of accent because this is a nation of immigrants, except for the Native Americans. And I know Native Americans with accents. So you need to be able to put your thoughts forward and feel confident in your competence, as was pointed out. feeling confident in your competence, and that your ideas are needed. Not just to stay inside of your head, but they're needed in order to express yourselves. I also give my students a paper to write based on an area of interest of concern to them. The other thing in my law class is I have people go to their communities, look around, and see what they want to change and who in government is responsible for changing it. Send a letter, yes, an old-fashioned piece of paper letter, not an email, because sending a letter today seems more powerful than sending an email. Send a letter stating, this is what I want the pothole fixed, streets department. Person who is over the streets department, there's a pothole on my block, and I want that pothole filled. If you could do it as soon as possible, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much. So that you can start exercising your power now. We're talking about political power. You can exercise it in smaller ways now by looking at things in your community. The street light's been out, or maybe you need another stop sign. Maybe you have a yield sign, but you need a stop light. Whatever it is in your community that you need to fix, you need to start thinking about how it can be fixed and how you can use that power. But you wouldn't know that unless you're telling someone in the class about it. The diversity of thought, our minds, our voices coming together to make the best solutions. So as we bring forward I'll tell you this very quickly. I was in Florida at the beginning of Black History Month, giving a talk for Black History Month at a Florida college. I was told I couldn't use the word diversity. I could not use the word equity. I could not use the word inclusion. This is before they took away, prison industrial complex. So little by little, they're trying to silence us. Don't help them by being silent. Just as you're not doing the community or yourself any good by not voting, you're allowing people who want to take your vote to have it easy by taking it away from you. You just don't vote. If they can convince you your vote doesn't matter, then you won't vote. So you've made their job easy. In a class, if you don't speak, you've made it easy for people not to take you seriously about what you think. What do you think? One of the things that is so powerful, the gift from God we have, is our minds. What do you think? She took justice in areas of education because she wanted us all to be able to think, to be the best we could be, to be and live to our fullest potential. And that means that when you're in the room, you're representing yourself, your family, your community. And that is a wonderful thing to be able to do and express yourself in doing it. So diversity is a beautiful thing. This country has been diverse since 1619, when there were 20 and odd Africans, Powhatan Native Americans, and Europeans, English, Irish, Scottish, Dutch, all together in Virginia in 1619. So we've been diverse since 1619. We've been diverse over 400 years. It's the issue of power we're still wrestling with.
Thank you so very much. Yes. We're hoping to have Miss Gloria Marshall come back to do a master class with us, hopefully in women, gender, and sexuality studies. So we're looking on the forecast for that. In closing, I want to thank you all for attending the 2023 Rosalyn Terborg-Penn Women's History Month Convocation. I want to thank Miss Gloria Brown Marshall, Esquire, for your stimulating thoughts regarding the modern day stewardship that we as Africana people, as well as decent human beings, inherit from our foremothers in particular. Thank you, Don Scruggs from the Student Center, Luther Moore, Mr. Everett, and Mr. Dexter Nixon for your technical support. And I want to thank you, the live streaming audience, as well as those in person, as well as the streaming audience, to enjoy the remainder of your day and the Women's History Month. We will close with the alma mater from Miss Knight, and I would also like to present Miss Gloria Brown Marshall with a certificate from the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Department.
Thank you.
Sing, we're gonna come on the stage, or you can have it all to yourself, Miss Lady. Thank you. We'll come back and get that later. Okay.
Thank you.
Tell them to please stand for the alma mater.
Please stand for the alma mater.
allegiance, we pledge thee our faith, a faith which shall ever abide. We pledge thee our love, we pledge thee our faith, whatever the future may bring. And thus our devotion fidelity to, and homage we pay as we sing. Fair Morgan, as onward the years quickly fly, and thou livest in memory sweet. We bring thee our laurels, whatever they be, and lay them with joy at thy feet. We pledge thee our love, we pledge thee our faith, whatever the future may bring. And thus our devotion fidelity to, homage we pay as we
You sounded good, Miss Soprano. Oh, you sound like glass shattered Ella Fitzgerald right there.